Grauman's Chinese Theater, Hollywood, November 1956. Klieg lights sweep across the evening sky like searchlights seeking enemy aircraft, their beams cutting through the smog and excitement that hangs over the most famous intersection in the entertainment world. The premiere of the Teahouse of the August Moon has drawn thousands of spectators to witness the carefully orchestrated spectacle that transforms ordinary sidewalks into stages for American royalty. The red carpet stretches from the street to the theater entrance like a crimson river, bordered by velvet ropes and patrolled by security guards whose job requires them to maintain order among crowds that grow more enthusiastic with each arriving limousine. Photographers position themselves with military precision, their cameras loaded with fresh film and their reflexes primed for the split-second shots that sell magazines and build legends. The air vibrates with excitement and anticipation, thousands of voices blending into a continuous roar that speaks of democracy's fascination with its own aristocracy. Signs wave above the crowd bearing messages of adoration for stars who represent everything glamorous and unattainable about American success, dreams made flesh and walking among mortals for a few precious hours. Glenn Ford's limousine approaches the theater entrance through controlled chaos that transforms ordinary city streets into temporary kingdoms where fame reigns supreme over all other considerations. Police barriers hold back crowds whose enthusiasm threatens to overwhelm any attempt at orderly procedure, while studio publicity representatives coordinate movements with the precision of military operations. Ford sits in the back seat of his vehicle, 40 years old, and wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo that speaks of success achieved through talent rather than mere luck or connections. His wartime service in the Navy has left him with an appreciation for genuine ceremony versus manufactured spectacle, and he approaches premieres with the same professional competence he brings to everything else in his career. But tonight feels different somehow, charged with significance that extends beyond the usual requirements of public appearance and studio obligation. Ford's attention focuses not on the red carpet ahead but on the crowds beyond the barriers, where ordinary people gather to witness extraordinary lives from whatever distance proximity to fame allows. If you want to see more stories about Hollywood legends who never forgot their obligation to honor those who served, subscribe to Glenn Ford Hidden Legacy. The limousine stops at the designated position, and Ford's door opens to release him into the controlled pandemonium of a major Hollywood premiere. Flashbulbs explode in rapid succession, their light creating a strobe effect that transforms movement into a series of frozen moments preserved forever on film. The crowd's roar intensifies as Ford emerges, their voices calling his name with the fervor usually reserved for religious experience. Ford acknowledges the enthusiasm with practiced grace, waving and smiling while moving along the predetermined path that will carry him through interviews, photograph sessions, and ritual handshakes with industry executives whose presence validates the event's commercial importance. But as he pauses for photographers, something in the crowd catches his attention and holds it with unexpected intensity. Beyond the front ranks of enthusiastic fans, past the carefully positioned VIP areas where studio guests observe the proceedings with professional interest, a solitary figure stands motionless against the theater's outer wall. The man appears to be in his early 50s, wearing a faded military jacket that has seen better days but remains meticulously maintained despite its obvious age. Even from a distance, Ford recognizes something familiar about the man's bearing, the unconscious posture of military discipline that survives long after formal service ends. The way he holds himself suggests someone accustomed to standing at attention, to waiting without complaint, to maintaining dignity regardless of circumstances that might challenge lesser men. Ford's trained eye identifies details that others might miss: the precise arrangement of metal ribbons on the jacket's chest, the carefully maintained shine of worn leather shoes, the quiet pride that radiates from someone who has earned the right to wear his service with honor. This is not a costume or affectation, but the authentic presentation of a man who served his country when service demanded sacrifice. The recognition comes suddenly and completely, flooding Ford's mind with memories of Pacific theater operations where young men faced death daily while older men at home debated strategy and politics. Okinawa, 1945. The hospital ship where Ford served as a petty officer, ferrying wounded Marines from battlefield aid stations to surgical facilities that worked around the clock to save lives and limbs. Ford remembers this particular Marine, though years have weathered both their faces since that desperate spring when American forces fought their way across an island that represented Japan's last major defensive position before the home islands themselves. The young man had been brought aboard with shrapnel wounds and battlefield fatigue, his eyes carrying the 1,000-yard stare that marked men who had seen too much violence too quickly. But Ford remembers something else about this Marine. Something that distinguished him from the hundreds of other wounded men who passed through their medical facility during those hellish weeks. Courage under fire that had earned him a Silver Star, one of the military's highest decorations for valor in combat. Ford had been present when the medal was pinned to the young man's hospital gown, a moment of ceremony that provided dignity and recognition during the darkest period of both their lives. The memories crystallize into immediate action as Ford abandons the prescribed premiere protocol and begins walking directly toward the crowd barriers. Studio handlers attempt to redirect his movement back toward the red carpet, but Ford's determination proves stronger than their professional concerns about schedule disruption and publicity optimization. "Mr. Ford," one of the publicity representatives calls with barely concealed panic. "The interviews are scheduled to begin in 5 minutes. We can't keep the press waiting." Ford continues his approach toward the barriers without acknowledging the attempted intervention, his focus entirely concentrated on reaching the man who stands quietly at the crowd's periphery. Security guards recognize Ford's intent and move to clear a path, though they remain confused about why a major star would abandon a premiere's carefully orchestrated progression to speak with someone in the general crowd. As Ford draws closer, the man in the military jacket notices the approaching attention and straightens instinctively, his bearing shifting from casual observation to something approaching military preparation. Recognition dawns in his eyes as he realizes that one of Hollywood's biggest stars is walking directly toward him with obvious purpose. "I remember you," Ford says when he reaches the barrier, his voice carrying clearly despite the crowd noise surrounding them. "Hospital ship off Okinawa, spring of 1945. You were the Marine with the shrapnel wounds and the Silver Star." The man's eyes widen with surprise and something approaching disbelief, his mind struggling to process the impossibility of being recognized after 11 years by someone whose life has moved so far beyond their brief wartime interaction. "Mr. Ford? Sir, I can't believe you remember. That was a long time ago and you must have seen hundreds of wounded men." "Some faces you never forget," Ford replies simply. "Some stories stay with you. You told me about your hometown in Ohio, about the girl you were going to marry when you got home, about the farm you wanted to buy. How did all that work out?" The man's expression shows both gratitude for Ford's interest and embarrassment about how reality diverged from youthful dreams. "Some things worked out, some didn't. Mary and I got married like we planned, but the farm never happened. Hard to get financing with just military benefits, and jobs weren't as easy to find as everyone said they'd be." Ford nods with understanding that extends beyond mere sympathy into genuine comprehension of challenges that face veterans transitioning from military service to civilian life. His own experience has been cushioned by existing career momentum and industry connections, but he's aware that most veterans lack such advantages in their pursuit of post-war prosperity. "What's your name?" Ford asks, though he senses he once knew it and has simply lost the detail among thousands of other wartime encounters. "William Kowalski, sir. Bill. I worked in the ship's laundry while I was recovering, helped keep track of personal effects for men who couldn't handle their own gear." The name triggers additional memories for Ford, who recalls that this particular Marine had volunteered for additional duties despite his wounds, understanding that purposeful activity provided better medicine than passive recovery. Men like Kowalski had made the difference between functional medical facilities and chaos during the most intense periods of combat operations. "Bill," Ford says, reaching into his tuxedo jacket to retrieve something he has carried to this premiere for exactly this possibility. I've been looking for you for quite a while. There's something that belongs to you." Ford withdraws a small velvet box of the type used to house military decorations, its navy blue surface showing the wear patterns of frequent handling, but maintaining the dignity appropriate for its contents. He opens the box to reveal a silver star medal, its silver surface polished to mirror brightness despite its obvious age. Bill's face shows immediate recognition, followed by profound confusion. "Sir, I don't understand. My medal was lost years ago when I had to sell my things to make rent. Haven't seen it since 1948. Ford's expression carries grim satisfaction, the look of someone who has successfully completed a mission that required considerable effort and patience. "I know. It took me 6 months to track down who bought it, and another 3 to convince them to sell it back. Some things shouldn't be lost to economic necessity." The crowd around them has begun to notice the unusual interaction between Major Star and unknown civilian, but their attention creates a protective circle of curiosity rather than intrusion. Something about Ford's serious demeanor communicates that this moment transcends normal premier entertainment, demanding respect rather than casual observation. Ford removes the medal from its case and places it in Bill's palm, the weight of metal and ribbon carrying significance that extends far beyond its material composition. "This represents something you earned through service that most people will never understand. It belongs with you, not in some collector's display case." Bill stares at the medal in his hand, his eyes filling with tears he makes no attempt to hide. "Mr. Ford, I can't accept this. What you must have paid to get it back I could never repay." Ford's voice carries absolute finality when he responds. "You already paid for it, Bill. You paid for it on Okinawa when you charged that machine gun nest to save your squad. The money was just paperwork to get it back where it belongs." Without warning, Ford steps back and renders a perfect military salute, his movement crisp and professional despite the tuxedo and premier setting. The gesture transforms the crowded sidewalk into something approaching sacred ground, creating a moment of ceremony that acknowledges service and sacrifice in terms that transcend civilian understanding. Bill instinctively returns the salute with muscle memory that has survived 11 years of civilian life, his bearing straightening into the military posture that once carried him through combat operations that tested every aspect of human endurance and courage. For a few seconds, both men exist not as star and fan but as veterans sharing recognition that bridges the gap between wartime service and peacetime success. "Honor can never be sold, Bill," Ford says quietly as they lower their salutes. "It can only be temporarily misplaced. Tonight it comes home." The surrounding crowd observes in respectful silence, sensing that they have witnessed something beyond the normal scope of entertainment industry spectacle. Photographers present lack the instinct to intrude on a moment that clearly transcends their usual subject matter, understanding somehow that some events deserve protection rather than exploitation. Ford shakes Bill's hand with genuine warmth before turning back toward the theater entrance where his professional obligations await completion. But his expression carries satisfaction that no amount of critical acclaim or box office success can provide, the deep contentment of duty properly discharged according to principles that matter more than career advancement. The premiere continues with its scheduled interviews and photograph sessions, but Ford's attention remains partly focused on the man in the military jacket who now stands with renewed dignity among the crowd. The medal in Bill's pocket represents more than recovered property. It symbolizes recognition that service and sacrifice retain their value regardless of economic circumstances or social position. Word of Ford's gesture spreads quietly through the veteran community over the following months, carried by those who understand that some actions transcend publicity and deserve remembrance for their intrinsic worth rather than their promotional value. Ford never discusses the incident publicly, treating it as private business between individuals who share common understanding of military service obligations. Bill Kowalski returns to Ohio with his restored Silver Star and a renewed sense of pride in service that had been diminished by years of economic struggle and social indifference to veteran concerns. The medal's presence in his home reminds him daily that someone noticed his sacrifice and considered it worthy of extraordinary effort to preserve and restore. Years later, when Ford's own military service becomes part of his biographical record, Interviewers occasionally ask about his relationship with veteran causes and his understanding of military culture. Ford's responses remain characteristically understated, focusing on the privilege of serving rather than the burden of obligation. "Every man who wore the uniform deserves respect," Ford tells one interviewer. "Some of them need help remembering that their service still matters. If you have the opportunity to remind them, you do it. That's not charity, that's duty." The Silver Star incident becomes part of Ford's personal legend among those who know the story, proof that his screen heroism reflects genuine character rather than mere acting ability. But for Ford himself, the gesture represents nothing more than basic decency, applied to circumstances that demanded action rather than sympathy. For more stories about Hollywood legends who never forgot their obligations to those who served alongside them, subscribe to Glenn Ford Hidden Legacy,